earthquakes are related. If you go and do a calculation, what's the chance that they're independent? It's essentially zero.
And
You were
Dr.
calculating
Jones,
before, just guesstimating on the power logarithmically of a 7.1 being larger than a 6.4. Could you go over that again? How much?
I didn't go and redo the calculations, did you?
Let me do this quickly in my head. I think it's about a factor of 8 more powerful in terms of the amount of energy that is released during the earthquake. Now it's being released over a larger area
And a longer time.
and I think that's, folks here in the LA region can attest to that. The ground shaking was pretty long. We would estimate that the actual rupture for this magnitude 7.1 probably took between 15 and 20 seconds, for it to rupture to start at the epicenter and then propagates out across the fault. Until we get a chance to look at the data in more detail, we can't be more certain about that.
And yesterday you said the 6.4 was about 5 seconds.
5 to 10, we got some data that showed it was a little on the slow side.
Yeah, a little longer.
And this one?
Probably about the same. Again, these are, the data needs to be downloaded and massaged, and it's Friday night, and so.
Doctor, one question I always find fascinating is, because I've heard you talk about it before, like, as best you can tell, the information isn't in the Earth's surface in advance of an earthquake, that we can go, okay, something's going to happen there. But does, this all in retrospect, of course, does this help that research?
Well, we will go in and look, but I spent a couple of decades trying to find something that was different about foreshocks than other earthquakes and never found it. We will go in and look, and one thing to be said, we have more data. We have much better stations now for this sequence than we've had for any previous foreshocks that we looked at. So if there's something there, we'll try and find it, but it's not obvious.
And you talked at the top about the probability of a 7 or greater magnitude. Does that include the possibility that this could just be another foreshock? Is that possible?
Yes, included in that approximately 1 in 10 chance of a 7 or bigger. That's a 7.0, 7.1, 7.2, 3.8 coming in. Okay.
What's your plan over the next couple of, next week or so? Are you guys like stationed here or studying this thing? Or?
He actually still has a paid job here.
We are going to be working analyzing data. There is a ton of information that's coming in. It's going to take a lot of work to go through it, and that's both the information that's coming in digitally, on the computers, looking at the seismograms, and then obviously the people out in the field are going to be gathering information as well.
But early warning, how much are you going to, where are we with early warning based on what we've seen with this?
The early warning system worked well. The problem was the distribution to public, and that was a policy decision that doesn't rest with us. It is being discussed whether or not the threshold should be lowered and give out those sort of warnings.
Policy at what level?
In the USGS.
You've got a really pretty right angle here between all of these clusters. How often do you see something like that?
That's actually relatively common because let's imagine you're pressing something. If you actually squeeze something, you'll often see conjugate cracks showing up. X-shaped cracks on the sides of buildings after the earthquakes. That's what this is. And you're accomplishing the same response to stress whether you move this way on this one or this way on this one or this way on this one.
And does that determine the direction of the energy at all?
It can.
It can. There is a pattern around the fault. It's called a radiation pattern. So there's one direction when an earthquake moves that gets less shaking than other directions. For instance, pointing from Northridge to Pasadena turned out to be the minimum shaking direction back in that earthquake, and there was no damage essentially in Northridge in Pasadena for the Northridge earthquake, while nearby communities were badly damaged, and that was a minimum shaking direction. So there is that factor. There is also something called directivity, that if you start at one place and you rupture down that fault, the direction you're rupturing towards, it's almost a Doppler effect type of thing, where you get a focusing of energy in the direction that the rupture's moving towards. In this situation, so in the first one, we think that it went, in the 6.4, it ruptured towards Ridgecrest, and there was probably some directivity focusing energy in that direction. Here, at least, it's a much bigger earthquake, of course, and the overall shaking level's higher, but at least the directivity was probably focused up towards Independence and Lone Pine.
Nothing gets a region more interested in quake preparation than defeating an earthquake.
Right.
So, the past 20 years, you haven't had a seismic activity this size.
Right.
There's a benefit to this. Certainly, it's
Well-
destructive in Ridgecrest. They're having a hard time, but there's a benefit.
Right. I mean, for the rest of us, we can look at what's happening at Ridgecrest and remember that at some point that's going to be for us. Overall for the state, there are fewer people getting affected here. Those people are suffering a lot, but the rest of the state can move in to help us, move in to help them, and hopefully that's happening now. When we have our earthquake, we're going to have a lot more people that are affected by it, and it's going to be harder to respond. It's been significant drought. We haven't had an earthquake this size for 20 years. And yet, in that time, we've seen more advances in seismic safety especially at the city level and county level than we've seen at any other time in California history. So we don't have to have an earthquake to remind us to get things done, but it sure doesn't hurt. And I think while we've been getting a lot going on, perhaps at the community level, it is individuals. There's a lot of individuals for whom you forget. And here's your opportunity. I think probably trying to get to the websites tonight might be futile. There seems to be a lot of access to the sites, but tomorrow, when you got a little extra time and you remember what happened, earthquakecountry.org has a lot of information about things that you can do individually, but also consider doing it with some community group.
And the San Andreas still hasn't ruptured since from Cajon
Right.
to the Cajon Pass, Palm Springs.
Right, so the southernmost part of the San Andreas, has to average an earthquake about once every 150 years. We have, the last one on the Mojave segment was 1857. The one on the southernmost part is 1680. Whatever's causing a long interval is happening now, and at some point our luck will run out and that interval will end. Just like our interval between sixes has just ended. It will be happening for the San Andreas at some point too.
And that'll be a much different story.
San Andreas, remember that we said between the 6.4 and the 7.1 is about a factor of 8. 7.1 to 7.8 is the same difference, and it will be that much bigger. So a 7.8 on the San Andreas is going to be at least 8 times bigger than this earthquake, and of course, a lot of it be a lot closer to us. But consider this is only 10% the size of the San Andreas earthquake's a pretty big earthquake. And I don't think we should underestimate, just because we didn't get hit that badly, just how difficult it really is right now in the Owens Valley.
Going from memory, the earthquake we had, it was like Easter Sunday.
Okay, Easter Sunday 2010, there was April 4th, the Elmira-Kukapa earthquake, a magnitude 7.2. I haven't been including that because it wasn't in California. The rupture was completely within Mexico. So yes, we felt it, and probably a similar sort of distance. Well, it didn't feel quite as strong here. We were a little farther away. But it was not one of our fault systems. So when we're talking about earthquake rates, what's happening on the faults, I didn't include that.
Can you remind us, like you talked about yesterday, there's no way to predict when the next big one's coming, right? That this is all random.
Right. All of this is random, and it's something people don't like. On top of that random distribution, we add earthquake triggering. So when we talk about a random distribution, that's of sequences. This is still all one sequence for all that we've had, a couple thousand earthquakes probably at this point. The count was about 1,500 before the 7.1 happened. Now, we've only really recorded probably 100 earthquakes since the 7.1, but that's because the ground's moving so much that we can't see the smaller ones.
On a grassroots level, we all understand what you're saying. Well, not all of it probably, but there are some people out there who are thinking, well, maybe this takes the heat off LA County. Maybe this will relieve the pressure on what's going on more locally. Could you address that?
Okay, whenever one earthquake happens, we get a lot of questions. Does this relieve the pressure over here? Does it make this earthquake worse? What does this tell about the future? What does it mean? And the problem is, what it means is we have earthquakes. And that's really all it means. It is a random distribution. It doesn't make a big earthquake more or less likely. And what we have here in Southern California, maybe we're seeing a situation where we've had this big drought. Maybe that was random fluctuation, in which case we say, well, the long-term rate is definitely higher than what we've been having for the last 20 years, and we really need to be having more earthquakes. Or potentially there was some significance to it, in which case, one earthquake, it's hard to say that you've changed the rate, but probably, if we've gone back to a higher rate, then we're back at a higher rate. And we just really need to remember the last 20 years was not representative of what we have. We need to average out just from what geology tells us.
Yeah, and also, just as Dr. Jones had said before, on a human time scale, these types of fluctuations may seem very dramatic, but on a geologic time scale, these are just minor blips. Again, this is a random process. We're just sampling at very discrete times.
Right, but if you have an energy release, say in Loma Prieta, over time, the shadow returns.
Well, yeah, and there's actually, when an earthquake occurs, there's a redistribution of stress. So it can relieve stress in some areas, but it can also load up or promote the possibility of another earthquake happening. And that's exactly what we saw here. The 6.4 actually promoted the chance for the 7.1 to occur. So that's when, the triggering can happen like that. Even though an earthquake, the 6.4 did release some stress, it actually promoted the subsequent one to occur.
And there's really sort of two different phenomena going on. There's what's our long-term rate of earthquakes, when are things happening, that fundamentally random distribution of which fault goes next. And then there's how one earthquake modulates that. And mostly it's happening really nearby. We have had a couple of situations, probably 3 here in California, where we've had an extremely large earthquake and the rate of other earthquakes goes down for a while. We had it after the Kern County earthquake, we saw it after Landers and Northridge, and we saw it after the 1906 earthquake. This is, we don't have enough data, right? Only a seismologist says it, I realize that. But with the limited, with what data we have, we can hypothesize whether that's a significant pattern or whether that's happenstance. And we're still trying to understand that. But so you have your long-term rate, and then you have the earthquake triggering. How does one earthquake affect the other? What are the stress changes that happen right now? And that's, we could see yesterday that we made slip on that northwest fault easier to happen. That doesn't mean it's got to keep on moving there. And that's why we ended up giving probabilities, because sometimes it happens, most of the time it doesn't. This is one of those times that it's really...
And you might get more data as a result of this.
We hope to have data that allows us to say quite a bit about more.
And you said the proximity to this one to San Andreas, it didn't increase the stress on San Andreas at all?
It's still pretty far, it's really too far away, so that even, this one's going to have a bit more impact because it's a bigger earthquake, but it's still far enough away that it really is, with our rule of thumb that it's, 3 or 4 fault lengths is about as far as we ever see it. We're probably a little over 4 fault lengths away from the San Andreas. So it's closer than when we had the 6.4, but it's still not at a level that gets us to get up and jump. I'm looking at the time and the fact that it's 10 of 11, and you guys probably all have newscasts at 11 o'clock.
There is.
My suggestion was we go and do one more check for data and plan on doing a restatement at 11 where we can give you the details at that point, so you can use this for your broadcasts.
Okay.
But let us go see what we got. Yeah.
Thank you, Liz.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
And then maybe we can call it quits for the night.
Seismologist Dr. Robert Grace, U.S. Geological Survey. They're going to find a way and find out a little more data they can pertaining to this particular 7.1.
You're my hero, bro.
Once again,
You're my hero. You gave him room, and
In case they want to take it. I think they're going to take some Bakersfield.
Bob is like that guy, if you're the quarterback, or he's the one that just barrels through. That's right, man. You're the one who tackles me. You're the one who tackled me. I was strong safety, right? So That's right, bro.
Loading onto other settings, as you were saying.